Okay. Thank you. Thank you. It was lovely having you guys join. Thank you so much. And Edison, you are a doll. What a good doggy. I'm going to change over now to the next session here, this program. We are so privileged to have join us in Monterey with some new programs, right? So we've got some new starting up CVC units, and we're going to have Andrew Chang of United Airlines Ventures jump back on stage as one of those that we're profiling here. Sandy Knox, partner of Sidley, is going to be leading this conversation with a specific emphasis on ESG, which I know is a huge area of importance for corporates right now. So in addition to Andrew, we're going to welcome Patrick, and we're also going to welcome Chad Bone. So please join me on stage for this spotlight session on ESG and sustainability. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you again, Christina, and all of GCVI for having us back for this great conference. It's been a terrific 2 days here, and we're so glad to be back in person. So we're just going to jump right in because I think you've met all of these gentlemen before. Andrew Chang, Chad Bone, Patrick Hogan. And we'll just get started because we don't have very much time. So this topic of ESG strikes fear into everybody's hearts because it's so big. You know, it's environmental, it's social, it's governance, and what does that mean for each of your global companies that is in so many businesses? We'll start with you, Andrew, and go on down the line.
Sure. Earlier this morning, Jim from SBD mentioned corporates can be a force of good, and I smiled because we couldn't agree more, right? I think actually United, if you look, we launched the first new branding campaign last month, and it's good leads the way. And that means a lot of different things. Yes, it means, Connection Saver will hold planes for you in certain circumstances. We'll give you a better product with the new planes. But a big component of that is also ESG. And around that, certainly the climate impact, I spoke a little bit about it yesterday. Around sustainability is very simply for us sustainable aviation fuel, right? That is our single most direct impact on the environment. So to the extent we can find alternative ways to sustainably manufacture, produce, and consume aviation fuel on a non-fossil based manner, that is how we plan to decarbonize. Another component around that is around DEI. You look at what we're doing across the firm, and as an example, given the pilot shortages, we have our own aviation academy training pilots. And so, as an example, a big part of that program is looking at gender diversity, women, ethnic diversity, people of color, to promote that diversity within the pilot ranks and the broader labor force. So that is a driving force around the corporate side, and it absolutely falls and translates to the CVC side as we look at investments, particularly around sustainability, right? Looking at SAF production alternatives, and on the DEI side, it is a component of our investment criteria.
Great. Thanks so much. Chad.
Good. Happy to be here and welcome everybody again. I see some of the same faces from yesterday in our talk about energy. But yeah, so at BP, we've got a range of themes that we're touching upon. And I spoke yesterday about net zero by 2050 and trying to reduce our emissions in support of that. But in addition to that, there's a range of technologies to help us to get there. And it's a huge effort if we're trying to reduce our emissions at least by 50% by 2030 to get there. And so it's good for BP to do that. We've got customers that want to see clean products. We've got customers that want to have mobility that's clean as well. And so we're touching not only from the upstream to the midstream, but all the way to the downstream. But the other part to ESG that's key is, and part of our thesis, and BP has a set of aims that we put in place 2 years ago, was that we want to do good for the planet as well, and to help the planet get to environmental responsibility. And the way that we're doing that is not just talk, but we've got a Region Cities and Solutions business unit in BP that's working with cities and states and countries to help them think about how they decarbonize. And that could be putting in EV charging stations. It could be carbon offsets. And so we announced just about a year ago that we're the partner for Houston. So Andrew and myself both being in Houston, and BP is a key part to advising how the city of Houston decarbonizes. And so that's a key part that as we look at our ventures team, it's not just for internal BP, it's also externally as well.
Great. Thank you. Patrick.
Well, thank you, Sandy. Yeah, on behalf of Honeywell, we've also been, we have this, I think, some very similar scales and issues as both United and BP. We're in hundreds of locations around the world, over 100,000 employees in buildings and data centers. We run airports, factories. So we have a big commitment to do that. We've actually been driving down our emissions, certainly on the greenhouse gas, by 90% since 2004. So that sounds a lot, but it's nowhere near good enough, right, to do that. So just recently, we committed to be carbon zero on scopes 1 and 2 by 2035. And actually, in our culture, that means we'll be there before to do that, right? So in order to get there, a couple of different ways. One is around our internal footprint. So think a lot about all these big factories I mentioned. We're retrofitting a lot of solar, wind, other kind of uses of technology that we're innovating or partnering with to get there as well to do that. We've also signed up on the Science-Based Targets initiative to really get to our Scope 3 emissions, because that's a big, big part of the whole equation, working with our customers and our supply chain as well to get there. And similar to Chad, it's in a number of big areas where we're enabling our own technologies to really be kind of dog fooding and consuming around that. So we're kind of excited to be working on sustainable aviation fuel, for example. We launched a molecule called Solstice that is used to reduce the effect of greenhouse gas and refrigerants by 99 point lots of nines %. So what does that mean? Well, that means that it's now in 100 million cars actively with your aircon, and it's taking the equivalent of 50 million cars worth of pollution off the planet every year. So these things are big.
Right.
So you take a molecule like that and you think, well, so that was interesting, that's for cars. But now we work with a company like AstraZeneca on the pharmaceutical side.
Right.
There's a propellant we use to inhale pharmaceuticals. And that's another way now to help them hit their Scope 3 emissions as well. So we're all super interdependent linked, and you can't claim, hey, my goals are within my control and independent. They're not. They're very much part of an ecosystem of suppliers and so forth to do that. On the inclusion and diversity side, that was an area I think we've really kind of bootstrapped and pulled ourselves up, brought in a great I&D leader, Chaya, and she's been helping us think about different chapters, really getting deeper into STEM. And we feel like bringing women and people of color into the education, particularly around science, is going to make a big, big difference. So you'll find across all the Honeywell centers, there's a lot of real active sponsorship around bringing people in, teaching them, learning them, to the point where they can actually become the future engineers. They're going to shape the way that the planet's going to work and consume energy. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, you touched on a topic that I'd like to expand on a little bit more, and that is nobody's acting alone in this. And I know that all three of these organizations up here, your organizations, have collaborated in different ways, and I'd love to hear from you all a little bit more about how these gigantic global institutions that are huge and can move the needle on their own are also joining forces for good in the ESG space. So why don't we start back over here with you, Andrew?
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. Absolutely. That is fundamental to our organization and how we approach investments. We are actually a minority investor. We don't lead rounds to drive home the fact that we do need to collaborate. We need to be part of a larger group in evaluating the technology, the company, getting all the right players to pull together. I think Patrick, Chad, and I, we have different email signatures and different addresses, but it's very familiar. We speak to across organizations on a regular basis. I think with Chad's group, we've come across 4 of his different groups across the world, right? Both domestically and across the pond, because BP Ventures is just that large. And they're working on a lot of different things that, frankly, overlaps with what we're looking at in terms of SAF potential. Similarly with Honeywell and Patrick, he has a much more diverse business than ours, and actually touches all 3 verticals that I spoke about yesterday around technology, aerospace, and sustainability. We are co-investors in Alder Fuels, which is looking at woody biomass as a feedstock to produce SAF. So, our organizations, top to bottom, actually do communicate fairly regularly, weekly, I would say, pretty regularly on pipelines, opportunities, how can we work together towards the same goal. And then on top of that, I'd also add, right, UAV's just a year old, but we look to very established organizations like yourselves and looking at best practices, how can we make the decision-making process more quickly, how do we approach risk and assess that. So internally, there's a great collaboration there as well.
Great.
Yep. So venture capital really only works when you've got partners at the table. We take on risk, but we leverage our dollar. And so what we tell our C-suite in BP is for every dollar that we spend, we have $7 to $8 around the table. So for $1 billion fund, we have $8 billion that we've invested in the ecosystem with co-investors and co-partners. And that's critical. And that's critical for ESG. That's critical to decarbonize. That's critical to work with major cities and solutions. But the other side that is really key, and we heard this at the Energy Forum yesterday, are kind of really early stage technologies and trying to bring those to bear. And a lot of times you'll hear myself and others say, that's a bit too early stage, and we don't invest in seed Series A, it's got to be Series B. But we do support accelerators and incubators. D3 out of Denver is one example. Greentown Labs in Houston, the ION in Houston, even Plug and Play, I'll give them a plug here. There's a range of accelerators that are out there that is really key to make sure that not only are we helping to show interest and show a bit of seed capital to get them started, but also to show deployment options and getting our businesses involved in those early stages and our technologists. And I think that's, we've seen the value in spades for startup and CEOs and management teams that want to engage from that perspective. But yes, if you're only investing by yourself and you don't have co-partners, you're not doing venture capital correctly. Is the way I would put it.
Great point.
Yeah, very similar. Maybe, Sydney, I can kind of share a recent example. So just yesterday, a quick plug. We're very proud. We were part of a large consortium invested $198 million in electric hydrogen. It's a brand new green hydrogen company just over the road in the valley there. But it was, not only did they have tremendous financial advisors and venture funds that we're really excited about. Okay, they've done the math, the money works. Companies like Fifth Wall and Capricorn, so great companies there. But also the other syndicate on the industrial side, the strategics, were small companies like Amazon, Rio Tinto, Mitsubishi Heavy, who else have I missed out now? Equinor, a big Norwegian, they own Statoil and other big renewable energies. So the interplay of, well, I'll show you what we understand, and here's where the value chain connects with your value chain. That syndication is truly valuable for us. It's actually it's almost invaluable. The amount of equity that we put in, we're going to get a lot more back. We've started sharing and helping each other. Yes, we've got a fiduciary obligation to help electric hydrogen be really awesome, and they're going to do that with or without us. But we're really learning a lot. Oh, and selfishly, hey, they need help with cybersecurity or automation. Well, these are things that Honeywell can offer as well. So we're all kind of adding component parts to help the final solution for their end customer be even more effective and accelerated to market. So I think that's just kind of a very recent example about leveraging all the VCs, the financing, and the syndication of all the knowledge and awareness that these companies bring.
Right. That's really inspiring. And for the newer CVCs in the audience, perhaps, who don't have maybe as well-established networks, how would you suggest they go about building those kinds of networks? Do they just pick up the phone and call people? Do they email you? Do they, connect to you on the Brella app here? And I mean, how did you all start to have these really vibrant conversations about what you can do? Chad?
Yeah, I think it's just getting your feet wet. I think it's getting started. It's coming to these events. It's making your first investment. It's investing in a fund. We started our venture capital team 15 years ago, a long time ago. We invested in funds. We tried to learn the space. We came to the events. And since then, we've moved more towards a strategy of direct investments. We're, helping incubators and accelerators through that process. And you're going to find that new venture teams start pretty quick. TDK Ventures is one of those. 3 years ago, and now they're very established and have done some great investments. And Nicolas is a loud voice at these events, and I think he actually departed yesterday, but this space moves very quickly. You have to get engaged and get involved, and you'll see that if you're doing things right, if you're making good investments, if you're failing on investments, that's also a learning as well. You're going to meet the right folks and get on boards and have co-investments like Andrew and myself with Fulcrum. And trash to biofuels.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so ESG, again, back to the idea that this is a huge issue and everybody's trying to solve it in all different kinds of ways. How will you measure your success in achieving the ESG goals of your organization? Why don't we start with you, Patrick?
Yeah, so for us, it's in two publicly stated ways we're going to measure it to do that. So one is how much of our R&D is actually being spent on outcomes for our customers that are truly ESG enabling. And today, we can measure it at 60%. We've done a lot of work to get to that. I know we want it to be higher, and we think probably our customers would like it to be 70 or 80%, and I think that's fairly achievable. And then the other part of that is around of our portfolio, how much of that as well is actually generating revenues that are truly ESG enabling as well. So it turns out that's also a magical 60%. So that's our baseline. We're not super pumped by those numbers. We want to get them up.
Right.
But we've been able to put in now a mechanism where we can track it. And we think between what we're investing and then what we put in, what we get out, is where we better measure that impact for ourselves and more importantly for our customers.
So we look at it in three buckets, the ESG bucket, but if you look at the environmental side, that's really what are the technologies that we're trying to invest in. So it could be water management, it could be renewables, it could be clean tech, biofuels, et cetera. So we set a target to make an investment in hydrogen this year, as an example. On the social side, there's a range of social pieces to think about. Our team, having diversity in our team. I think now we're at 50%, over 50% female in our team.
Great.
Which is huge, which is great. Super excited about that. But also from a safety perspective, so driving safety practices within our startups, that's critical. Making that a part of your board meetings, safety, environmental. And that's something that you can miss pretty quickly for early stage companies. And then on governance, what we've started to try to do is to feed in as part of performance targets for our management team, is to put in a ESG component to that, which could include safety, which could include improving their supply chain, reducing their emissions, but putting money towards pushing those objectives. So if it's a bonus, if it's stock, that we look at that at the end of each year.
Right. Great. Andrew?
Sure. On the environmental side, again, it's pretty simple for us. It goes back to sustainable aviation fuel. You look at the supply of that, it's in the single-digit millions domestically. We are aspiring to get back.
How much do you use in a year?
And so we are aspiring, pre-pandemic 2019, United alone consumed more than 4 billion gallons. Global demand for aviation fuel in 2019 was on the order of 90 to 95 billion. We've seen the rebound. For traveling this summer, you will see people are traveling again. So we are rebounding much more quickly than when we thought, thankfully. But you look at the call it 5 million versus the 4 billion that United alone needs, we're starting from ground zero, right? So the fundamental metric we're looking at is, can we produce, procure, and consume the SAF we need at a market price to parity to Jet A today. That's a tall order, but that is a fairly simple metric, right? How much SAF can we get? And that's why we're working with the BP and Honeywells of the world to solve that. On the social side, I mentioned the DEI. It is a component of our investment criteria. We look at it as part of our diligence. We make sure the companies, what is your DEI strategy? How do you focus on it? So that is a component of the diligence process, as well as when we're making investments, there's a portion of our portfolio, and our target is to make sure we are supporting DEI, diverse management teams and companies as part of that metric. On the governance, similar, I think Chad mentioned, our senior leadership, and this is now United Airlines C-suite, component of their compensation, their performance is based on sustainability. It is based on how many investments we make, what kind of investments are we driving down or enhancing our capacity, our offtake on SAF. You'll see a lot of our investments, we do have a commercial agreement. We do have a component of SAF offtake on some of those investments. Not all, it's not a requirement, but it is a big driver of many of those investments. And so that offtake, the fact that we are making investments in sustainability is a hard driver of the C-suite.
Great. All right, well, we just got a few minutes left here. So the last question is, if you could give one piece of advice to somebody trying to tackle this ESG issue from the perspective of a CVC, what would it be?
Yeah, I think for us, it was fairly simple because it is very relevant and a big focus in today's world. And we lean on a lot of the discussion that is already happening and already happened at the corporate parent level, right? It is a big part of who we are at United Airlines. And so CVC, UAV is just an extension of that discipline, of that culture. So, I don't think it should be as challenging as it needs to be. Be in tune with what your culture, what the objectives are at the parent company level, and define how your venture capital investing can directly support that.
Great.
Yeah, and I would agree with that as well. We set our targets and our strategy, and ESG is a part of it. But it's good business doing ESG. And managing your supply chain better, reducing emissions. So it's good for the bottom line, it's good for your startups, and it's also good for the planet and good for your company, et cetera. But look at it from a startup perspective, and if you look at it from that perspective, it's good business to push ESG.
Okay.
I would say you have a unique funnel and awareness of the innovations that are out there and what's going on and what customers are kind of asking about. So grab your partners by the hand and bring them out and travel with you. So whether it's your chief supply chain officer, your CISO, your head of HR, all of them are impacted by these issues, right, to do that. And so we spend a lot of time either virtually and now hopefully physically bringing out our C-suite and really getting them to kind of walk in the shoes. And you'd be surprised what other entrepreneurs or other big venture companies can really kind of share and stimulate conversations and ideas about how we can bring that back to the farm as well.
Right. And so do you take them out to meet with your startup companies?
Absolutely, yeah. So a good example, like we had a meeting with some big data and AI companies, and it turned out to be a HR hiring conversation. Now our CHROs are communicating regularly, sharing best practices, how to retain talent, how to have a much more diverse workforce, think about minority partnerships.
Okay.
So it's stimulated so many different conversations.
Right.
It isn't just about your CTO or your head of the investment committee. It's about bringing in the whole team.
Right. Excellent. Well, thank you all so much. This has been super informative. I think everybody's going to be around during the lunch hour. If you've got any more questions, thank you again to GCVI for hosting and asking us to be on this panel together.
Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you.
Great.